Hi, I'm Nathaniel Stinnett, and this is your very brief introduction to the Environmental Voter Project. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Environmental Voter Project, we're a national, nonpartisan nonprofit where we work with over 10,000 volunteers and donors to do one thing and one thing only, and that is mobilize millions of environmentalists to vote. And not just any environmentalists. We target people who are likely to list climate or the environment as their number one priority. And we mobilize them to vote not just in the big, sexy federal elections, but in every election, local, state, and federal. We're trying to build an unstoppable block of consistent climate voters. Now, why do we have this as our focus? Because it turns out that tens of millions of environmentalists skip elections. We identified 11.2 million already registered voters who even missed the most recent presidential election back in 2024. And that is not only an enormous number nationally, but when you break it down by some very important states, like these 5 swing states that you see here, you'll notice that the number of non-voting environmentalists is so large that it happened to be bigger than Donald Trump's margin of victory in each of these states. And in Georgia, it was even 4 times larger than Donald Trump's margin of victory. So this is a very powerful pool of potential climate voters that we are looking to activate. Now, how do we go about doing this? Well, it's a 4-step process. Very briefly, step 1, identification. We work with data scientists to build predictive models in each of the 21 states where we work. And what these models enable us to do is identify on an individual basis. So not broad demographic groups like you get in polls, but we're identifying individual voters who are really likely to not just care about climate and the environment, but literally listed as their number one priority. Then we look at their individual voting histories, because that's public record, and we only focus on the ones who are unlikely to vote. That lets us move to step 2, mobilization. We work with thousands of volunteers around the country to canvass, call, and send postcards to these voters. Then we as a staff run robust direct mail and digital ad campaigns just focused on these infrequently voting or non-voting environmentalists. And we're not trying to convince them to care more about climate, remember. They are already there. These are people who, like, you shake them awake at night, they're going to scream climate change, but they're not voting. And so we run hundreds of randomized control trials each year, figuring out which messages work best with which subgroups of these environmentalists to turn them into new voters and then consistent voters. And we've gotten really, really good at it. That brings us to step 3. We're not just focused on getting these environmentalists to vote in one-off important elections, although boy do we get some great results in these one-off important elections. Rather, we're trying to turn them into a consistent voting bloc that votes all the time up and down the ballot. And if you really care about building good, consistent voting habits like that, you need to work year-round. And boy, do we. Some groups talk a good game and say, hey, we work year-round. At the Environmental Voter Project, we typically work in 300 to 400 elections each year. General, primary, local, federal, state, you name it. Not just because all of those elections typically have something to do with climate policy, but even the ones that don't have anything to do with climate policy, we still view them as important because that's how you create consistent voters. Even if it's a library trustee or dog catcher election, we're going to use it as a way to turn these non-voting environmentalists into better voters. Because ultimately our goal is to change the electorate. We know that nothing motivates a politician more than the prospect of winning or losing an election. And so it's incumbent upon us to flood the polls with climate voters as often as possible. If we can do that, politicians will lead on climate, not out of the goodness of their hearts, but because they just want to win. And that means politicians will go where the votes are. All right. When we look ahead to this fall of 2026 in the midterm elections, we have already identified 3.4 million of these already registered super environmentalists who are unlikely to vote in midterm elections. And as you can see, the numbers of our targets in some crucially important states are really enormous. I mean, difference-making numbers. Over 430,000 in Texas, almost 25,000 in Alaska, a state where maybe 260,000 ballots will be cast this fall. So we're targeting a huge number of these voters. Now, how do we know that we can make a difference? Well, because we measure our impact really rigorously using two metrics. The first is randomized control trials. Let's say we identify 500,000 unlikely to vote environmentalists in Texas. Well, what we do not do is immediately start communicating with all 500,000 of them. Instead, before we talk to a single one of them, we randomly separate them into two groups, a treatment group and a control group. Usually about 85% are in our treatment group, so about 430,000. The remaining 15%, the control group, about 70,000, we set them aside. We put them on a shelf and we never talk to them. The remaining 85%, they're the ones who get our voter mobilization messaging. We canvass and call and send postcards and direct mail and digital ads to them. Then the election happens. We still don't know how we did. But a few months later, public voter files are updated, and we can see how many of the people in our treatment group voted and compare that to turnout in our control group. Because what many Americans don't know is that, yeah, who you vote for is secret, but whether you vote or not, that's not secret. That's public record. So we can compare turnout in our treatment group to our control group, and by doing that, we can control for the impact that all these other campaigns have. And we can isolate what the Environmental Voter Project's sole impact on turnout was. And what we have seen is that over the past 5 years, we have likely increased turnout in thousands of elections, but likely isn't good enough for us. We only report and take credit for what's known as statistically significant results. These are randomized control trial results where we can prove that we were solely responsible for increasing turnout while controlling not only for all other groups, but also controlling for random outcomes. And what we've seen is that in 2021, and 22, and 23, and 24, and 25, we have been solely responsible for increasing turnout by as much as 1.8 percentage points in presidential general elections among our targets, 3.8 percentage points in other statewide elections, and as much as 5.7 percentage points among our targets in local and congressional races. These are enormous numbers in politics. The second way that we measure our impact is over the long term. Every time we communicate with a voter, we tag them in our voter file and we track their voting history. Ever since we launched our one city proof of concept now 10 years ago, we have now communicated with over 14.5 million unique individual voters, all of whom care deeply about climate and the environment, and were pretty awful voters or else we wouldn't have been talking to them, right? Well, as of this past spring, we could see in public voter files that over 2.4 million of those voters have now become such consistent voters that they have voted in their most recent federal election, their most recent state election, and even their most recent local election. They have become super voters, such that you could be running for dog catcher and you'd look at the voter file and you'd say, yep, that person's going to show up. Better figure out what issues they care about. This is the metric of which we are most proud. We've gotten a lot of great attention for our cutting edge behavioral science and data science work. And we are now at a point in time where your volunteer efforts and your donations can make an enormous difference. We've got a 10-year proven track record. Our results not only have stayed consistently good, they are getting better and better. And even as we have grown from 1 to 21 states, trained over 9,000 volunteers, we've also been able to remain really, really efficient. And each year, we spend over 90% of our expenditures on identifying and mobilizing voters. And what this tells us now is that we can 3x our spend. We can triple our efforts before we even hit a point of diminishing returns. We are truly at a point now where we just need to add money and add volunteers. So heading into the midterms, as I mentioned, we're mobilizing 3.4 million low voting propensity environmentalists in these 21 states. And we could really use your help. So here's 4 ways you can get involved now. 1, volunteer. We only give you messages that we have proven work through randomized control trials. So go to the Get Involved page on our website and sign up to volunteer. We'll train you, we'll hold your hand until you're ready to go. Number 2, are you part of a group, local, state, or federal, that might like to partner with us? Well, reach out. We partner with over 60 organizations, and we'd love to grow that number. 3, donate. Better yet, become a monthly donor. The reason we get such good results is because we work year-round, but we can only work year-round by getting year-round support. And 4, if you want to introduce our work to your friends online, please reach out to us and we'll schedule a Zoom fundraiser to meet your friends. Finally, subscribe to our YouTube page and go to environmentalvoter.org to get involved. You want to make a difference. We have a proven way to create new and then consistent environmental voters. And we would love to see you online mobilizing voters with us this year. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.